Hey y'all! It's entry number 58 of this off-season series where we discuss a different player's fantasy value each day as a group. We are another day closer to the start of the 2022 NFL season. Each day we'll drop a name, go through some positives and some concerns of their fantasy profile, and then I'll give my personal opinion at the end. Today's discussion will be on Dalvin Cook, running back, Minnesota Vikings. We'll start with the positives with Dalvin Cook's fantasy profile. We'll start with the fact that he's been an elite rushing talent in the past. Over the course of his career, Dalvin Cook has averaged an impressive 4.7 yards per carry and has never dipped below 4.5 yards per carry in any single season of his career. In addition, during the 2021 season, Cook had 21 runs of 15 or more yards, the second most in the NFL among running backs, and 73 evaded tackles, the 11th most among running backs in just 13 games. In 2020, Dalvin Cook was second in the NFL in rushing yards with 1,557, had 10 breakaway runs, the sixth most among running backs, 106 evaded tackles, the second most among running backs, and 1,096 yards created, the second most among running backs according to Player Profiler. According to RotoWire, in 2020, he also had a broken tackle percentage of 19.2%, which was above average for the position. He's clearly been an elite rushing talent, which makes him more intriguing to invest in for fantasy leagues. The next thing I really like about Dalvin Cook's fantasy profile is that he's a bell cow. Dalvin Cook is a dual threat running back who has carried the ball 810 times and caught 131 passes over the last 3 seasons. He's averaged 21.4 touches per game and 112.8 scrimmage yards per game over the course of his career according to Pro Football Reference. He is without a doubt a bell cow back when he's healthy, and if he plays all 17 games, he very well could lead the NFL in touches. The last thing I really like about Dalvin Cook's fantasy profile is his red zone rushing usage. During the 2020 season, Dalvin Cook had the most red zone rushing attempts in the league with 68 according to NFL Savant. During the 2021 season, Cook saw the third most red zone rushing attempts in the league with 47 according to NFL Savant. Getting a lot of red zone utilization will raise the touchdown ceiling of Cook and make him a more appealing fantasy pick. Moving on to some of the concerns with Dalvin Cook's fantasy profile. Injuries. Dalvin Cook has struggled with injuries throughout his career and hasn't played in 15 games in any single season that he's been in the league. He's played in just 56 of a possible 81 regular season games, and he's listed as a very high risk for injury by draft sharks. His injury history at the NFL includes an ACL tear in 2017, multiple hamstring strains in 2018, an AC joint shoulder sprain in 2019, a groin strain in 2020, multiple ankle sprains in 2021, a shoulder dislocation in 2021, and a shoulder sprain in 2021 according to draft charts. He's got a lot of talent, but availability is an important ability, and Cook is a guy that will likely miss a few games in 2022. The next concern I have with Dalvin Cook's fantasy profile is the new coaching staff and the potential impact on Cook's fantasy value. Let me start by saying that I really like the Minnesota Vikings coaching staff hires on paper, and I think that they could be a sleeper team to come out of the NFC this year. But I think it's fair to question whether or not they will be as beneficial for Dalvin Cook's fantasy value, in particular as some of the previous offensive play callers, Kevin Stefanski in 2019, Gary Kubiak in 2020, and Clint Kubiak in 2021, who have all had histories of running back heavy approaches. The Vikings' new offensive play caller in 2022 will be head coach Kevin O'Connell. O'Connell's offenses in the past have been more mediocre in providing carries to the running back room, and Vikings wideout Justin Jefferson has commented saying that the Vikings offense isn't a run-first offense anymore. And while it would be easy to get excited about the reports of the new offense utilizing Cook more as a receiver at OTAs, You need to be careful in not going overboard with this report, since statistically the offenses that O'Connell was a part of as an offensive coordinator in Washington and Los Angeles utilized the running back room at a below average rate in the passing game. The last major concern I have with Dalvin Cook's fantasy profile in 2022 is his slight down year in 2021. This is a really picky concern, but Dalvin Cook had a bit of a down year by his fantasy standards in 2021. Cook finished as the RB15 in standard with 172.3 total fantasy points and 13.3 fantasy points per game. The RB15 in half PPR formats with 189.3 total fantasy points and 14.6 fantasy points per game, and the RB16 in full PPR formats with 206.3 total fantasy points and 15.9 fantasy points per game according to Fantasy Pros. Considering he's going to be 27 years old going into the 2022 season, he could be beginning to decline. There seems to be a clear stopping point for running backs, which occurs after their age 28 season. From a per touch standpoint, running backs tend to decline beyond the age of 26, which is why we've started to see running backs have a hard time getting a big contract once their rookie deal is over. Some additional thoughts on Dalvin Cook. In 0.5 PPR formats during the 2021 season, Dalvin Cook had 1 out of 13 games with 0 to 5 fantasy points, 3 out of 13 games with 5 to 10 fantasy points, 3 out of 13 games with 10 to 15 fantasy points, 3 out of 13 games with 15 to 20 fantasy points, 2 out of 13 games with 20 to 25 fantasy points, and 1 out of 13 games with over 25 fantasy points according to fantasy data. The Minnesota Vikings offensive line is slated to be the 19th best in the league after finishing as the 23rd best line in the league last year according to Pro Football Focus. They are projected to have 4 of the 5 same starters. The only change happening will be at right guard as the team goes from Udo to Ingram. Capable backup. Dalvin Cook's backup Alexander Mattison put up a stat line of 134 carries, 491 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, 32 receptions, 39 targets, 228 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown according to Pro Football Reference in 2021. Dalvin Cook was the RB3 in standard, the RB3 in half PPR formats, and the RB2 in full PPR formats in terms of total fantasy points during the 2020 season according to Fantasy Pros. In 2019, Dalvin Cook was the RB5 in standard, the RB5 in half PPR formats, and the RB6 in full PPR formats in total fantasy points according to Fantasy Pros. Personal opinion. Dalvin Cook is currently going off the board as RB6, about pick 11 overall on ESPN, and RB4, about pick 5 overall on Yahoo. Dalvin is one of the biggest boom-bust first-round picks this year because there are some warning signs that could lead him to being the surprise early-round bust. With his injury history, the age where declining efficiency is common for a running back, and coaching philosophy changes. Yet, it's really hard to ignore the upside he's shown in the past as a top 3 fantasy running back as recently as 2020, and has if everything goes well with no injuries or decline. I'm slightly lower on him than the general consensus, but if I were to draft him, I would absolutely make sure I get Alexander Mattison because there is more risk with Cook than most other first-round picks. For each of these entries, we will highlight a charitable cause or organization. Dalvin Cook's My Cause My Cleats in 2020 was for the Minnesota Vikings Foundation. Here's a link to that organization below. And that's it for today's entry. If you enjoyed this entry, be sure to like and subscribe.